Well, thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Tanya Tucker with Full Frame Initiative. I'm the Chief of National Engagement and Partnerships here. I am thrilled to be talking with one of my favorite people on the planet, Sean Goode, who happens to be one of our senior fellows, one of five wonderful people who are lending their time, talent, expertise to this broader vision of how can we become a country where everyone has a fair shot at well-being. And so this is an opportunity for me to learn a little more about Sean and what makes him tick and why he's attracted to and kind of, compelled by well-being and where he sees sort of that alignment with the work that he cares about. So thank you, Sean. Thank you for the time and being willing to talk with me.
Well, it's an honor, and anytime I get to be in space and experience your brilliance, I feel better on the other side of it.
Oh, thank you. Right back at you. So I wanted to start with, as you know, and you've heard us talk, many times about well-being really is about, us individually and collectively being whole, and how do we see each other, right? Not as others, but we're all more alike than we are different. And how do we see each other in what we call a fuller frame? So I'd love to start with, if I just asked the question of who is Sean Goode, what would your full frame response to that be?
Well, I think framing is the essence of all things, isn't it? The way that we shape something in perspective to better understand it and allow that understanding to then inform the way we experience it. And an opportunity to help folks better understand me so we can experience this journey that you and I are having together on this call. Most importantly, I'm a father. I have the privilege of being dad to almost 23-year-old son Samuel and 17-year-old daughter Hope. I am husband of the most amazing woman in the world who is strength personified and love magnified. And I'm a servant who cares deeply for community and for humanity. And I'm driven by the desire to watch people choose themselves. And as they choose themselves and make a commitment to themselves, make choices on how they want to experience the world around them, that makes us collectively a better people, a better humanity, a better contributor to a world that is beyond the human experience and positions us better to experience the fullness of the things that surround us.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. I think when we first met, I met you as you were executive director of the wonderful nonprofit Choose 180 in the Seattle area. And so how would you describe a bit sort of the work that you're doing now and kind of the journey that led you to what you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, this fellowship has been a beautiful through line. As we've been, Tanya, you and I have been journeying together for longer than I've been a fellow. And as I've been a fellow, I've had many transitions in the time in between.
Right.
And the consistent thread in the midst of all those transitions have been the fellowship. And I'm incredibly grateful that I've had that privilege. I began my journey with Full Frame when I was serving as executive director of an organization called Choose 180, where we were committed to dismantling systems of injustice and creating spaciousness for young people to be seen as possibilities to be developed and not problems to be solved. Well, we work closely with folks who were both on the side of liberating young people from systems of injustice and those who work within the systems that incarcerated young people to create pathways that collaboratively together reimagine the way the systems function, to create outcomes that allowed young people to live and thrive in the neighborhoods they care for. And it was a great journey, and it was a beautiful journey, and one that allowed our paths to cross. And after building that work up and stewarding it for a period of 6 years, I took some time, and in that time I took, it really began to create the body of work that I'm doing now, because I, for the first time in my life, spent a committed amount of months to choosing myself. And I had chosen family, I had chosen community, I had chosen service over myself for a very long period of time, committing my life to building frameworks around others for them to thrive, and had consistently not considered what I needed in order to be full, in order to be healthy, in order to be able to give back to the world in a way that wasn't out of meeting deficits within me, but from the abundance that was within. And I took those 3 months and did that work. And then I came and started a gig in philanthropy and spent 9 months diving into philanthropy, thinking I could support the world by getting resources redistributed to the places they were extracted from, and realized that wasn't the path, and ultimately land where I am today, which is the most authentic place that I could be in this season of life as a coach, a consultant, and a professional speaker who shows up in spaces to invite people to choose themselves, and with the deep conviction that infinite impact begins with the individual, which in the context of this work we do together as a fellow shapes that my approach begins from within the person, and what the framework that lives within the person and how that contributes to their ability to experience well-being. Where historically the work of FFI has talked about the built environment outside of the individual and how that can encourage the spaciousness to experience well-being. And I think there's a beautiful symmetry that we're creating with one another as we build a pathway forward.
Yeah, so I know that I certainly do this work from my own lived experience and what's important to me. And I think on, the best days at FFI and trying to advance this well-being work and well-being movement are those days where I also feel healed from, harms of the past. And so I'm really interested in sort of your idea of like this internal well-being built environment. Certainly, as you know, we say that, right? Well-being, it's not this destination we get to, it's really how all of us live our lives. It's a universal drive. And so, individually, it's what drives us all. And then what gets in the way, right, are our sort of structures and systems of how the country is designed and how it works. And so we focus a lot on sort of that systemic level, right, and systemic barriers to well-being, and really thinking about well-being collectively, right, that sort of collective or community well-being piece. So I'm really intrigued by your internal built environment. Can you say a little more about, what you've been thinking there?
Yeah, I believe deeply in epigenetics, right? And you witness it in creation, and you witness it through the experience of like embodied humans, right? I regularly tell the story of the monarch butterfly and how somehow miraculously through multiple generations, this butterfly can migrate all the way from the southwest to the northeast and have 3 different iterations of it before it gets to its peak migration point, and then somehow find its way all the way back. I mean, essentially, like, one monarch butterfly dies, another one turns into a caterpillar, then cocoons, becomes another monarch. And after the 3rd run, that one returns, and they know where they're going the entirety of the time. There is something genetically being handed down within the monarch that's informing that migratory pattern. I mean, so much so that when they travel over the Great Lakes, they swoop up because at some point of time in the iteration of the world, there was mountains there that no longer exist, but it's so ingrained in the DNA that they continue to travel down that path. And we believe the same thing to be true for humans, particularly those that have been further away from justice, economic justice, educational justice, communal justice, right? Like those that have been furthest away have things encoded within them that tell them how they should operate in the world around them to get to the destination that they desire. And so if we change the built environment outside of them, the systems and constructs outside of them, and we don't address the fundamental things that are happening within them that they've developed and cultivated over generations to be able to survive within the systems as they exist today, then we end up creating environments outside of people that are uninhabitable because of what it is that they've produced within themselves. A good example of this, right, is safety, right? You can create safe spaces for people. You can create safe spaces based on what people say they need to feel safe. But if they don't feel safe within themselves, it doesn't matter what the space is outside of them, because they'll continue to interpret what's around them as fear, even if everything outside of them says otherwise. That's work that has to be done here first. So there's this partnering or this pairing with equal intention and simultaneity to say, yes, these systems historically have caused harm. How do we reimagine them together? And we've historically learned how to survive despite the systems that have caused harm. How do we do the work within ourselves to begin to build something new here? as we're building something new out here.
I think what you're talking about really is the work of healing, right? Individual healing, community healing. And we talk about healing as part of our like well-being design principles. But what I think what you're saying is, right, how do we make healing not another like checkbox, right, for an organization, for a system, right? Like, oh, it's Tuesday, this is our healing Tuesday. What are the three, activities or practices? But that really is the sort of deep internal stuff that, individuals and communities, quite frankly, have to do for themselves. I think systems and other organizations can do things that don't get in the way, right? That don't hamper that ability, but that ultimately healing work is very individual and community, focused. And if you're outside that community, I don't know if you can heal me. I can only heal myself. And so what are the ways that we help people think about that sort of internal piece as a part of this bigger well-being picture as well? It's kind of where I go with what you just said. And
the shared semantics makes a big difference. Because if you're inviting people to outwardly consider what the built environment should look like, and you tie that directly back to inner work that they need to be doing and to complement that outer work, then there creates a synergy where you're not asking for people to lift something else at the same time. It's a shared lift. It's hard to picture what can be when your internal framework is limiting that lens based upon what has been. I often struggle with this in the work that I've done around justice reform, where we invite the people who are closest to the pain point and furthest away from justice to reimagine what justice should look like. That makes sense in practice, and ideologically. But what generally happens is folks have a hard time completely liberating themselves into a place of thinking that allows that expansiveness to be real, because they've grown up in the confines of what has been real. And so like if you ask me, right, to design a car, and I've never driven before because I haven't been able to afford a car, I might design an affordable car, but when I get it on the road, it may not function in the way that it should because the roads are created in a particular way. If you ask me to design a bridge, and I only have experience with footbridges, and I design a bridge that works for foot traffic, and then all of a sudden you want to put a car on it, we're going to have a load bearing issue, right? And so it's important that we hold this tension of, we need the people who are furthest away from justice and closest to the pain points to work in the redesign model, and understand that they're redesigning from a framework that isn't fully realized as a result of the context that they've been growing up in. And they'll create a world that may work for them, but it may not work for everybody else that has to live in there too. And this is about a collective thriving and not an individual survival.
Right. So how do we, and we just being the broadest sense of we, not just FFI, we make this parallel processes, deeper process? We often talk about centering community, which is more than just community engagement and community like feedback and ideas on our own ideas. And thanks, let's check the box, heard your voice. But really, how do you partner and be in relationship with those closest to the harm, like you said, to imagine, to redesign, to be part of decisions. And yet, if we're not paying attention to this piece you're talking about, in terms of that, like sort of internal, well-being roadmap, that's only going to get us so far. So how do we pay attention to and work on all of these things at the same time? And who should be working on them, right? Everyone's not, I don't think everyone's positioned and should even be actually working on some of this, deeper internal work.
And well, first thing I'd say is like, you have no business doing the external work if you're not doing the internal work. And so if you're leading people through external imaginative practices, where you're compelling them to find safety within themselves and within the environment that they're currently in that allows them to dream big enough outside the bounds that they can create those kind of spaces, then you need to be doing the work within yourself to also
Mhm.
experience that kind of safety and living in the principles that then allow them to see it embodied so they can feel comfortable to do it themselves.
Yeah,
And so, from a point of
yeah.
practice, like the individuals who are stewarding the work, if they're being driven by ego, scarcity, and fear, and as a result aren't able to live an embodied practice of love, liberation, and abundance, and you're inviting people to do design work that requires a framework of love, liberation, and abundance, then I would invite you to begin to do the work yourself to realign so that way your internal practice is in alignment with your external ask.
Mhm.
Because then it comes from a place of ideology that loses practicality because you're not embodying it yourself. And this first is an embodied experience before it can become a projection for a future
Yeah,
state.
yeah.
And so, like, if we're doing the work, we got to be doing the work. And organizations that are doing the work, if they're operating out of scarcity within the institution, or if they're driven by us as center and needing to be able to do the work, right? Or if there's a fear that if they're not taking up this space, then nobody will. If those entities and organizations as a collective are operating in that way internally, but then going out into communal places and saying, hey, like, let's dream big together, there's incongruency there, and that incongruency is felt even if it's not stated. And so it begins with the individuals who are practitioners first. And then when we begin to embody it and then show up in an embodied way, then it creates a spaciousness that's felt, and we can create containers for folks to be able to feel the safety necessary to begin to embody it and imagine in the same way. But it has to begin with us as practitioners. And I think more often than not, in fact, I know more often than not, that's where we begin to fall short, is we want to walk people through a practice that we're not fully vested in within
Yeah,
ourselves or within our organization.
yeah, yeah. Sorry, my pause just has me
Yeah,
thinking,
yeah, no,
thinking
it's all
about this
good.
in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
What would be your, what are you hoping to see, to learn on kind of the other side of this fellowship? Like, what do you hope your thinking and what you're bringing to this work leads to? What's the impact that you're hoping?
Yeah, yeah. I'm presently building out a pathway for folks to go deep within and begin to contemplate what their internal build needs to be in
Yeah.
order for them to live in a liberatory way, right? Like, and what does it look like to embody these principles of love, liberation, and abundance in practice and not just idea, right? Like, it just
Mhm.
sounds good, but what does it actually look like in practice, particularly when you do so in an environment that's out of alignment with this? And so as FFI historically has been saying, how do we get this out here to align in a way that it makes it easier for people to do this work, which I agree with. If
Right.
we do the both and, then we're approaching it with intention so we get closer and closer together. And so as long as I get the chance to journey with FFI, my passion place is building out that pathway that allows people to really experience the infinite impact that starts in them. And as it starts here, it can pour out of them into the world around them. And
Mhm.
that's what drives me. And I believe some of the work that I'm doing now and building that out for the practice that I'm invested in, and also the conversations that I'm having, not just here locally in the States, but also internationally with folks to better explore what's happening within people who are thriving despite the conditions that they're growing up in, right? Like, we begin
Yeah.
to flesh out what are the common denominators in practice, not just an idea, that show up in everyday people that allow them to be exceptional despite the restrictions of the systems that abound.
Yeah. Yeah. I think often, and particularly where we're working, in the fields, in the approach that really is trying to, uh, reimagine our systems, right? That aren't working for people, not just aren't working, but actually harming, people on a
Yeah.
day-to-day basis.
Yes.
That we often feel that those people who are closest to the harms, that like 24/7, they're thinking about how the systems are harming them.
Yeah.
And so coming to this work with my own lived experience, it's like, yeah, we know that, right? Like,
Mhm,
it's not a surprise to us, and
mhm,
we're,
mhm.
being resilient and living our lives, but that's actually not taking up, right, the majority of my
No,
headspace, quite
no,
frankly.
no.
Um, and so I think we often get surprised when, we are in relationship, with people in community and who've been closest to the harms, how they quickly go to and want to focus on, right? Like, what does this mean for me, my community? What can we do, right, for each other? And it's less about what others are doing to me, and
Mhm,
like, yeah, I'd like them to stop that, but
mhm,
sort of, I've always seen, like, sort of the first go-to is, what does this say about us in community, and what can we be doing for each other,
mhm.
with each other?
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that's, I don't know if it's hard for people to understand, or get folks just think that, like, yeah,
Yeah, and the more time we spend in the work, the furthest away we get from the pain point, and the more we think that everybody's thinking
exactly,
at a systems level, right? But like
right,
the
right,
systems that I was most present to were like when I was, growing up was like, I know on Thursdays we're headed to the food bank,
yeah,
right? Like that's
yep,
a system that I'm very aware of, but I'm not thinking about it as a system. I'm thinking about it as a function of life,
that's it,
right?
right, right,
When I was living unhoused and sleeping in my car, I was thinking, okay, I need to pull up in the parking lot at this particular hour, make sure I set my alarm for this hour so I could get into work to get like the menial check, and then like how I'm going to make that check stretch. I was engaging in a system, but I wasn't thinking about the system. I was thinking about survival. And
yeah,
so like there is an imbalance in the way that we imagine people will have capacity to go deep,
yeah,
and it's not because of their inherent ability to experience the depth. It's because by virtue of where they're pressed and pulled, there's some real surface level things that need to be navigated before that depth
mhm,
can be explored.
right,
And just
right,
because someone's removed from those circumstances and those environments doesn't mean the trauma is not still there. That's keeping them from experience the greater things that should be available.
yeah,
There's an intention systemically to keep people in the shallow end, because as long as they're there, they don't get a chance to experience the beauty and wonder that lives in the depths.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, you have my head spinning in this conversation, as you often do when we have these conversations. And I'm just happy that, like, you're lending your thinking about this, to FFI and this broader work. And I'm certainly looking forward to, like, going on this journey with you. I think how you're thinking about this, um, really is different, and I think can expand, this work around well-being, deepen it, and make it more meaningful for folks. So I'm excited to go on this journey with you and to learn alongside you.
Look, Tanya, I've been telling you for as long as we've been traveling together that wherever you go, I'm more than happy to go because I know that it's a place that's going to be dynamically changed by your presence. So thank you for the invitation and the gift to travel.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much, Sean. Appreciate you.
Likewise.
All right.